Biao, welcome to Amphlett Reviews, and today we're doing a Hong Kong content review, this time for 88 Films' final release of 2022. It is the Iceman Cometh, a very appropriate Christmas film, has a lot of Christmas themes, very winter, very cold, and this is very anticipated for a lot of fans in the kind of Hong Kong genre, being the fact that Vinegar Syndrome has released their version a couple months ago with a different sort of different transfer, different sort of extras, but this one has the exclusive Taiwanese version, extended version on a separate disc, which has additional scenes, additional kind of material compared to the Vinegar Syndrome, alongside different extras and back and forth. So a bit of a kind of competition back and forth release between the UK version 88 film edition with the nice kind of exclusive artwork there, which actually is really fantastic, as you can see there, versus their kind of Vinegar Syndrome's very nice kind of snazzy kind of embossed kind of slipcase and their kind of exclusive artwork cards and all that kind of thing. There you go. That's very cool. The colour schemes are very appropriate to the eyes. They look really nice. You get the poster cards there, and disc 1, disc 2 with the extended Taiwanese version, which is much longer as well, which is the 127-minute version, extended version, versus the Hong Kong version, which is 115 minutes. So it depends on which version you like to go for, which one you like to check out. Alongside this edition, you get a poster, which is really cool. I think it's the original poster on there and the brand new artwork, and you get a really big, thick-ass booklet, which goes behind the scenes of the film a bit more detail, which is really cool. So let's dive into the Iceman Cometh, whether it's going to be a cold one, whether it's going to be a warm one for the audience to see. Let's check out the Iceman Cometh. Iceman Cometh was released in 1989, directed by Clarence Fok, who also did one of my favourite Category 3 films, Naked Killer, which I praised for on the channel. Please go and check out the review for that if you want to see a bit more insight into that review and that film. The film stars Yuen Biao Maggie Cheung as the two main leading actors, and you get the wonderful, wacky villain alongside. The storyline for the film features Yuen Biao, who's a dynasty warrior who's going after a serial killer / rapist who is basically causing chaos and ensue within his wake, who is seeking basically power and wants to escape the kind of lands he's kind of in and the situation he's in, because he has basically caused too much chaos, and he basically wants to kind of harness the power of the Wheel of Time, who basically is a device, kind of Buddhist kind of spiritualistic kind of templish, and he basically wants to kind of escape the kind of the current time period he is in, and through the acts of kind of back and forth between Yuen Biao's character and kind of a bit of a sword duel battle, they kind of get into an altercation and they get frozen within the kind of time and the kind of ice block itself. Waking 300 years later, they basically kind of get into a fish out of water kind of scenario, and they both have to adapt to the kind of modern age of the 80s during that time, and kind of how things have changed, and kind of the principles of kind of honor and respect are kind of altered. Obviously, for our villain character, this is perfect. He wants chaos, he wants can be freedom to kind of do what he wants, and he kind of utilizes his kind of strengths with a martial arts kind of background and his desire for power and wealth and kind of bloodthirsty kind of indulgence, as he says in the film, versus Yuen Biao's character, which is kind of more a traditional fisher out of water, where he's very much doesn't know the kind of lands, doesn't know the language, doesn't know a lot of electricity, and he has a much more tougher time adapting to the kind of the modern age. And as he's adapting to the new situation he's involved when he comes across Maggie Cheung's character, which is Nurse Polly. He's a kind of prostitute. Basically, he kind of works for her, or basically is a servant to her in the sense. And the bulk of the film is back into the comedy, fish out of water type scenario. And therein lies some of the issues I have with the film. And I find it quite amusing, quite funny. The last two films I've reviewed on the channel, Viva Erotica and Yes Madam, both films address this idea of just adding comedy, adding nudity, adding stuff to the film that doesn't quite have the place in it, mainly for box office appeal, to make the money. Because interestingly enough, on the extras on the edition itself, there's a fantastic extra by David West, which kind of talks about the movie and about the state of kind of Hong Kong cinema during the kind of late 80s, and about the idea of embedded comedy into the film. As a Westerner, as a kind of a traditional kind of UK American kind of audience member, we're there for the action, because we associate a lot of Asian films with action films, and we want to see that really cool, out over the top kind of wushu style action. And the action set pieces in the film are the bookends of the film. Unfortunately, they are the start, they are the end, and when you get those kind of really cool sequences, they are fantastic, and they really set the stage really well for the film. And we can consider the rest of the film in terms of the comedy, in terms of the banter and the kind of the hijinks and the toilet humor and the kind of the almost comedic kind of faces and pantomime type of performances that happens in the film and many other films within the Hong Kong genre, as kind of just filler, or kind of just there to kind of pad out the film to get to the good stuff you want to see. But surprisingly, in terms of interpretation and what these films were designed for, is for the comedy aspect, because a lot of Hong Kong audiences during the late 80s wanted more comedy. They wanted the more kind of obnoxious kind of, silly kind of comedy with some recognizable faces, and that was the kind of the selling point. And one of the facts that he mentioned on the kind of Blu-ray edition, which is quite surprising to me, was when he talks about Sammo Hong's film Eastern Condors, that made decent money in the cinemas, but it didn't make enough money compared to something like the Lucky Star movies, where they were breaking in big bucks. And why Sammo Hong kept on making those kind of silly comedies more than the serious ones is because they made more money. The studio wanted to back him because they were the bigger hits in the cinema, they were big hits in the box office. And I find that so fascinating, and it makes more sense now looking at some of the ones I've looked at recently with Yes Madam having some kind of tonal problems, as I mentioned, the film, in terms of having a more serious aspect versus the more kind of goofy comedic aspects of the film with the bumbling thief characters. Viva Erotica acknowledges also with making a category 3 film with a mockumentary kind of style, kind of taking this meta commentary about just adding in comedy, adding in nudity. And this is kind of another example of mid-80s Hong Kong movies doing the same thing. You've got the premise, which is the awesome kind of cover representation there. That's what you want to see. That's what I paid the money for, in the sense, this kind of crazy out of time travel fantasy movie in the wake of Zulu warriors, two kind of warriors out of time, out of place, fish out of water, adapting to the new 80s. And a bulk of the film, in this one particular, is the relationship between Yuen Biao and Maggie Cheung's character, and I do think it's very hit and miss. I don't think it quite works to what the film's degree is. And I think my mistake also in watching the film was watching the extended cut, because the extended cut is 2 hours and 7 minutes, and it is way too long. A good portion of the film is their kind of back and forth kind of, I would say, sort of comedy, but it's very kind of loose comedy. It's very broad, it's very kind of inappropriate, very silly kind of humor. It's kind of very typical kind of, she's very angry, she's very kind of obnoxious, and she's kind of using Yuen Biao's kind of gullible nature kind of thing of him being out of time to her advantage, to kind of whip off kind of clients, and to kind of make him do all the dishes. And it's funny at first, like a lot of the setup, a lot of the kind of the initial kind of introduction stuff is pretty good. I didn't mind it. I was liking the chemistry back and forth, but after a while it gets really boring and it gets kind of frustrating, and they kind of shoehorn this kind of love relationship and aspect towards the kind of end of the second act leading to the third act, which again doesn't quite work. It isn't well earned, and it's just kind of there in the film. I'm a big fan of Maggie Cheung's kind of performances and her kind of roles, and it's nice to see her having the flip side compared to the police story, her being the butt end of the joke. Now this time Yuen Biao's the butt end of the joke in the film in terms of her performance and her kind of ordering around and slapping him and kind of swearing at him. That is fun. It is fun for a while, until it gets boring, and it's just like, okay, when are you going to get to the good stuff? And unfortunately, the rest of the kind of the film kicks up a gear. It leads into the third act, which is very expected and very kind of typical kind of Hong Kong kind of attitude. That is where it's going to decide whether you enjoy the film overall or not. And for me, it was very much very divisive. There's aspects I did enjoy quite a lot, and there's other aspects I really didn't. And maybe the extended cut was a mistake, because it did extend a lot of those additional sequences. I had a lot more of that, which for me was grinding the film to a complete goddamn halt. And it's like, I'm perfectly fine with comedy in the film, I'm perfectly fine with an even balance, and that was something I discussed within the Yes Madam. With this one, it's a little bit that kind of rinse and repeat over and over, and it doesn't quite work for my liking. The villain character is very cartoonish, she's very over the top, and it tries to make light of some scenes which I don't think quite work, with the kind of him trying to raping the boss's wife, and that kind of comes out of nowhere. And you've had that during the start of the film, you don't really need to explore that further, and he is so kind of even over the top. But I do think his motivation, I do think his kind of like his attitude isn't quite crystal clear, and there's moments of thinking, would he really do that? Would he really walk away from the situation? And I do think they could have utilized him a lot more. I do think they could have used him in terms of experiencing his kind of fish out of water. I liked recently the introduction of him joining up with a gang kind of thing, or him kind of taking on almost a Terminator kind of esque kind of presence with like maybe the local gang kind of youth, in the sense of him just kicking some ass. I think that would have been interesting. I think he would like to send his kind of adapting to the role, maybe a bit more so kind of compared to Yuen Biao's character. I think there could have been a bit more of an even balance. The film eventually members the characters in the film and cuts to him towards the kind of leading into the first hour, and I think that was a bit of a mistake. Obviously his outlandish kind of, you know, villainous stuff is great. It's really fun. You know, the fact he gets a lot of weapons, the fact he manages to get the sword is great, and he's trying to, you know, reclaim that kind of the will of time, and he's trying to go back again. What lets the film down ultimately is just too much comedy, just too much of just rinse and repeat kind of sequences, and maybe the Hong Kong version is better in that kind of. I think the film could have benefited from a 90-minute cut. I do think there is quite a strong film here. Condense it, you need to make it a bit more tighter. I think you could have, you know, blocked each of these parts a little better. You do get this kind of sweet ass 80s style action set piece fight scene towards the third act. It's pretty awesome, mixed between swords and gunplay and, you know, crazy kind of visual effects magic. I do think the overall kind of, you know, arc between Maggie Cheung and, you know, Yuen Biao's character wasn't really that satisfying. I do think the film does utilize Yuen Biao's kind of skill sets with his kind of acrobatic kind of fight scenes. I do think he has good natural comedy, and he just have some good timing with his kind of performances, and I do think he's a really good gifted performer, and I do think he's a fantastic actor, and I really appreciate seeing a lot more of him, his range from his very early beginning to where he unfortunately ends up being in terms of, you know, mid-80s kind of leading into the 90s kind of, you know, Hong Kong cinema, and the decline of just Hong Kong cinema in general by up to that point, going into that point kind of thing, and, you know, his career getting less and less kind of, you know, mainstream in that sense, which is a bit of a shame of overall. I think he's pretty fun. Maggie Cheung is definitely very unlikable, very much a whiny kind of character, but I can't help but not like her because she's Maggie Cheung at the end of the day. She's really fun. You know, it's nice to see kind of a flip side between her and obviously from Police Story. You know, her character is obnoxious, is very annoying, is very much very mean-spirited towards Yuen Biao's character, but, you know, I think she played really well. There's a bit of vulnerability to her. I wish they kind of explored that a little better. I wish there was some more kind of downtime moments. I do wish there was less typical back and forth repetitive comedy and just more signs with those two. I think that would have helped the film. I think he would have bought the fact that, you know, towards the third act kind of emotion, you know, I think there's some good scenes where she's trying to change, which is nice, but it comes so late into the film, and then by the end of it, it's kind of like, what was the point overall? What was the film trying to say between those two characters? My understanding and my overall kind of interpretation of what the film's trying to go for is the idea that everyone has principles. You know, there's a really good speech that Yuen Biao's in the hospital bed, and he says the idea of, you know, when we're born with certain personality traits. He is born with, you know, honor, respect, kind of dignity, and I will stick to those honor. And he does. He really does stick to those honors, even though he does sort of fall for Maggie Cheung's character in the film. You know, and Maggie Cheung is very much a kind of aggressive, a lot more kind of mean-spirited kind of character, and this idea of people don't change, and obviously that's shown with the traits with the villain character doing he's up to his old trick. You know, you've got two characters that are defined within their kind of character traits and their personalities, while Maggie Cheung is the outsider in that sense, and she has the opportunity to kind of learn from the experience them two are learning and kind of change and alter, and ultimately she does towards the end of the film, which I think is maybe the point of it. However, I don't think it comes across that way very clearly. I don't think it's, you know, it doesn't hit the ground running. It kind of just stumbles upon that more than by design, which is a bit of like the kind of downside of the film a little bit yet again. So yeah, that's my thoughts and opinions on Iceman Cometh. It's not a great film, it's not a bad film, it's somewhere in between, and I think it's going to be very divisive and very kind of split down the middle, wherever your enjoyment factor kind of begins and where it ends towards the film, for sure. What are your thoughts and opinions on Iceman Cometh? What are your thoughts and opinions on the 88 film release? Did you get the Vinegar Syndrome release? Which one's better? Comparing extras and, you know, the transfers and all that stuff. What are your thoughts and opinions on both releases? Please comment down below. So in the meantime, guys, Amphlett Reviews, signing out.